welcome to the webinar. I'm very happy to have all of you here. My name is Maria Wagner, and I'm the co-founder and general manager of the GamesForest.Club. Georg is here as well as the other co-founder. So we're really happy to have you here. The goal of the GamesForest.Club is to reduce the ecological footprint of the games industry or the creative industry in general. And like one part of it is, of course, look into reduction, how we all can emit less carbon. But the other thing is, of course, it's important to offset what you can not reduce. And here are many ways how you can do this. And yeah, there are many projects which you can invest in. But the thing is that the impact is always a different one, depending on which project you choose and which one you invest. And this is why today, Pavlos, the head of ecosystem restoration in the GamesForest.Club, will tell you more about it. I will tell you just like one more thing about me. I'm in Helsinki right now, and just to give you a little of an experience how you can reduce the carbon footprint. I covered over 2,000 kilometers in one day without flying, to show that traveling without flying is possible and doing business while doing that, like working. So yeah, just know that, of course, it's always important to reduce and not just to think that offsetting is the only solution. But yeah, so right now, I would like to hand over to Pavlos, and yeah, have a great webinar, everyone. And if you have any questions, drop them into our chat. We will collect them, and then at the end we will, yeah, switch over to the questions. Enjoy.
Thank you, Maria. Thanks very much. Welcome everyone to today's webinar. Every month, as you have probably noticed, we host a webinar to raise awareness about the issues that are behind our mission here at the GamesForest.Club. We want to protect and help create new forests as the prime solution to climate change. Nature-based solutions like forest restoration are the most effective, cost-effective, but also efficient way for mitigating the effects of climate change, reducing the amount of carbon that humanity has released into the atmosphere over the last centuries. And in order to meet the science-based targets of reaching 1.5 degrees Celsius of global warming. My background is on tropical biology. I'm a botanist. I have experience of close to 15 years in ecosystem restoration in Southeast Asia. But in the last 8 years, I have been involved a lot into open data, data-driven systems that merge technologies, ICT, with nature conservation. And I'm particularly excited to join the team at the GamesForest.Club because I think the gaming industry is, from one side, an industry that has a big gap in terms of environmental regulations and standards. On the other side, has an amazing potential, which is not only related to the economic size of the industry, but also the transformative potential that games have in today's society. So I'm really happy that we have a good amount of people in this webinar as well, and we can move forward with this new community of practice of opinion leaders in the gaming industry in order to achieve the goal of net zero gaming by 2030. So the problem is that every year we are losing up to 10 million hectares of forest, and this contributes to more than 10% of total greenhouse gases. So the fact that we are losing forest contributes to at least 10% of the issue of climate change. At the same time, the world, and especially developing countries, financially richer countries, have committed to financially support climate mitigation and climate adaptation. But currently, the support they are giving every year is about $20 billion, whereas their commitment is 100 billion. So there is a massive climate financing gap. And the policy world, the United Nations, international organizations are trying to find ways to engage the private sector in helping closing this financing gap. But when we consider the scale of the gaming industry, then actually this financing gap is actually something we can bridge with seemingly little effort. It is about coordinating this effort, making it visible and scaling it. So the problem has to do with carbon emissions, loss of forests as a solution to mitigate carbon emissions, but also a big financing gap that we have right now, just 7 years before the goal, the target year of 2030. So our purpose, as Maria said, is to support forest restoration with the power of gaming and the people of the gaming sector and the creative industries, and to have a massive impact on climate change, but also the biodiversity crisis, because these are two big problems that go hand in hand. And we cannot solve climate change if we do not also address the loss of species and the loss of habitats and ecosystems. So how we do it? We do it by handpicking a selection of a very diverse portfolio of projects from across the world. We are working with projects in 4 continents. I'm here sharing just a few types of projects that we are supporting, of course, in Germany and other parts of Europe, like Sweden, but also in Africa, in Ethiopia, in Brazil, in Peru, in Canada, in Colombia. And this is a portfolio that we are actually expanded very actively with the number of restoration partners that you can see on the right panel of your slide. So this is what we do at large. These are not all carbon credit projects. I will present to you some carbon credit projects in a minute. But what we tried to convince executives of the gaming sector is that they need to take action now, because if they do not take action now, at some point a regulator or a policy will come, or the market will dictate action. And at that point, it's going to be probably more difficult and also more expensive. So the earlier we act for climate mitigation, reducing the carbon footprint of a company, as Maria said, but offsetting what cannot be reduced, the easier this is for a company to engage, to achieve its climate targets, but also for the world, for humanity to achieve its climate targets by 2030. So first, we need to measure the problem before we attempt to solve it. So estimating the annual carbon footprint that comes from office operations, computer use, server use, flying or travel is very important. It is important for a company to know how much carbon it releases to the atmosphere as part of its operations. And then the next step is to use this carbon footprint in order to create a climate strategy with concrete science-based targets in paper. So once we have these targets, we know which type of projects, carbon projects, are most appropriate for that company to start offsetting. And then a payment is made, carbon credits are purchased, carbon certificates are issued, and a company has an audited, independently verified way to prove that its carbon footprint is offset. And then this has to be repeated next year. And our commitment as the GamesForest.Club is to continuously research and onboard the best carbon projects that exist out there. And I will explain in a minute how we choose them, what type of criteria we use in order to assess the quality of those carbon projects, to consistently monitor those restoration progress through state-of-the-art technology, which I will also share with you during this webinar. And then, as you probably, some of you know, have tailor-made support to all carbon investors, our donor members, to try to find the best solution for them to communicate their commitment and to gain public recognition of their climate responsibility. So before we start, my colleague Lisa is going to help us by sharing a poll. We want to know from the participants in this call, how many of you already offsetting your carbon emissions through carbon credits. So there's going to be a poll running now. on Zoom, and please take a moment to answer this question. Okay, easy enough question. We can maybe move on.
Yes, we have 75% answering rate. I'm going to share the results.
Okay, so 2/3 of our participants do not offset their carbon emissions. That's great. That's maybe we can transform some business operations today, or at least start doing so. Thanks, Lisa. So let's move on. What are carbon offsets? What are carbon credits? Carbon credits and carbon offsets are the same thing. So a carbon credit is a certificate that represents 1 ton of carbon dioxide that is either prevented from being emitted in the first place. For example, having a better energy technology that is saving energy and it is emitting less atmospheric pollution, less carbon, or a ton of carbon that is removed from the atmosphere as a result of a carbon reduction project. I will explain different examples of which projects are reducing emissions versus those that are removing emissions. Obviously, forests, which is our preferred solution, climate solution, are not only reducing, but they are also removing, actively removing. It's like a sponge that is removing carbon from the atmosphere. And this is obvious. We all learn at primary school about photosynthesis. Photosynthesis needs light, water, and carbon. And all this carbon plants take from the atmosphere. The more plants, the more rich forests, the more rich soils, the more organisms living in a forest, the more carbon they absorb. Ourselves as humans are all, our food is depending on carbon, hydrocarbons, proteins. The food we eat is all carbon. So this carbon cycle is what we all contribute with our processes. So companies that need to meet its emission targets, its emission mitigation targets, invest into a carbon reduction project. This project produces a certificate for this company, and this company receives these carbon credits for its investment. And this is a way to redirect funding, very much needed and valuable funding, to restoration work happening in the world. So what type of carbon credits exist? I said either reduction or removal, sequestration of carbon from the atmosphere. So how do we reduce carbon emissions? It's by having better cooking stoves in developing countries, stoves that do not emit too much smoke. There are more closed systems that produce the same amount of heat, even better, even more amount of heat, with less emission of carbon monoxide. Another investment that is reducing carbon emissions is, of course, renewable energy. If you have energy generated by solar panels or by windmills, wind energy, then this has a smaller carbon footprint. So this is the side of reducing the atmospheric carbon in the first place. But there are already massive amounts of carbon in the air, in the atmosphere, which we need to soak up back to the earth. And this we can do by either carbon capture technology, really expensive industrial scale machines that are sucking up carbon and they store it into some other energy form underground, or something much more cheap and much more physical, natural, nature-based solutions, planting trees. And again, GamesForest.Club is all about planting forests. So our preferred and beloved, indeed, climate solutions are forests, because we just see many, many more advantages and merits in planting forests and actually actively reducing the amount of carbon that is already in the atmosphere, not only the amount of carbon that is emitted. So we have a second question for you that we want to take stock from your preferences and to ask you to rank the following types of carbon credits according to your preference. So which one do you prefer most from least to highest? Feel free to answer all the questions, like all the options, put a mark in all options. Okay, let's give it a few more seconds. Do we already have some results, Lisa?
Yeah, it's about 70% again. So I'm going to end the poll now and share the results.
All right. So the majority of you do prefer nature-based solutions. Some of you also prefer renewable energy, carbon capture. Nice. We're going to have to analyze the results later on. Thanks, Lisa. Let's move. So nature-based solutions, why we prefer them? We prefer them because if they are designed and implemented correctly, they deliver the best possible co-benefits, which do not only have an impact to the climate by removing atmospheric emissions, but also they provide amazing benefits to nature, but also society, local communities that live off these forests. Obviously, climate mitigation is the context and the absolute goal. We want to reduce atmospheric carbon, remove atmospheric carbon from the air we breathe, basically, through forests. But then, of course, by creating new forest lands, we are actively creating habitats and ecosystems for species, other plants and other animals that might be threatened or even endangered or facing extinction. So biodiversity enhancement through the provision of habitats is also a very important aspect of nature-based solutions. But of course, when we have forests in rural areas, we also have communities, we have people living from the forest and from the type of habitat, this type of habitats. They are living out of it because they are dealing with forestry, they are harvesting non-timber forest products from the forest, like the different types of wild fruit, medicinal plants, honey, mushrooms, you name it. And of course, the forest help regulate not only the local climate and protect those communities from extreme weather, like floods and extreme heat, but also contributes to overall climate adaptation because they have a large range of ecosystem services, like cooling the atmosphere, filtering the water, protecting the soils, providing nice spaces for us to go inside and relax and recreate ourselves. And of course, by creating forests, we contribute to overall sustainable resource management because forests are often connected with agricultural land. So by protecting forests, we are also ensuring more productive food agriculture. We are ensuring food security, which are also very important development challenges. So, you know, the problem with climate change is that it is not only about climate change. That's why the UN has instituted 17 different areas of work, the 17 Sustainable Development Goals that are highly interrelated indeed. But when we are talking about nature-based solutions, of course, we're talking about forests, soils, and nature-based solutions taking place in the ocean. And the different type of, there are different types of projects within each of these categories. So when talking about forests, we talk about classical afforestation and reforestation. We talk about agroforestry, like a combination of agriculture and forestry, as we explained in the last webinar last month. And we talk about REDD+ projects like big public forests that, you know, constitute a big amount of the land surface. In terms of soils, we have solutions like regenerative agriculture, wetland restoration, biochar production. And in terms of water-based, nature-based solutions, we have mangroves, meadows of seagrass, and so on, seaweed cultivation. So any type of ecosystem that supports plant life that can absorb atmospheric carbon is a plus. So I have handpicked 2 types of carbon credit projects that we have in our portfolio to demonstrate the diversity of countries, but also approaches. We have one is the Gula Gula project in Indonesia, which we presented last month. It's an agroforestry and assisted natural regeneration project taking place in formerly degraded lands that have been cleared or destroyed by fire or unsustainable agriculture and land use. And by creating new high diversity farms, agroforests, they are creating biological corridors. They are connecting those wild and secondary forests. So species can move and re-diversify. So this is increasing tree cover, provides habitats to biodiversity, as said. It supports the local communities by diversifying their income through the cultivation of high value crops like coffee, cocoa, cinnamon, cloves, and so on. The other project that I present you is in Portugal. It is a traditional agroforestry montado landscape, one of Europe's last cultural landscapes that combines livestock production with cork trees. And this contributes to increased soil fertility, biodiversity gain, but of course also preservation of cultural landscapes and added value of this endangered land use type. So we are expanding our portfolio of carbon credits. I think we are going to have a few more in the coming next weeks. We are always open to discuss with individual companies and really tailor those nature-based solutions to their needs. Of course, we are following the standards of carbon credit verification. There are the main standards we are working with, and they are out there in voluntary carbon markets. But we are also, since we are focusing on forests, also very, very sensitive about the issue of biodiversity and about, social sustainability. So there are 2 main framework pieces of science that have emerged in the last few years from the Society of Ecological Restoration and the 10 golden rules for reforestation to optimize carbon sequestration, biodiversity recovery, and livelihood benefits. So this is the type of Bible or the Quran or the Gita of nature restoration. And we are very much fond of them. We actively contribute to this work. We like to provide a good case of engaging the games industry and industry into supporting this type of restoration work. And I'm sharing with you that right now there are discussions and work for a new standard, the Global Biodiversity Standard, which is promoted by Botanic Gardens Conservation International, and again puts the issue of biodiversity into the whole picture of carbon credits and carbon projects. And as you see here, it has to do with protection of habitats, protecting natural biodiversity, like not displacing native biodiversity by, tree plantations of tree species that are foreign to this land, but they maybe absorb more carbon. We have to see this in a more holistic way. Engaging local communities, maximizing biodiversity through restoration and natural regeneration, allowing the forest to do its regenerative work on its own, using native species, avoiding alien species that can carry diseases and so on, use genetic diversity, which is appropriate and resilient, and of course, implement robust monitoring, evaluation, and adaptive forest management in collaboration with the local communities. So all these type of standards, beside the carbon standards, from Vera, from Plan Vivo, from Gold Standard, which is what is out there in the market since many, many years, is in the DNA of the GamesForest.Club. This is like the type of principles we are following when choosing those projects in order to maximize the impact in climate, biodiversity, and livelihoods. So when choosing a project, we want to check for a number of vital quality criteria. For example, and foremost, additionality, like the carbon removals in this project are additional to what would have happened if the project was not taking place. In other words, all carbon removals happen because of that project. So every amount of money paid for a credit, carbon credit, contributes, makes a unique contribution to removing carbon from the atmosphere. So this is additionality, very important. And this is, of course, connected to double accounting. So every single carbon credit that is paid is removed from the market, from the carbon market. Then we check for permanence. Like we need to check and see all the risk assessments and the business plan and the project design documents that prove the long-term durability and stability of those carbon removals. Because if we plant trees now that are burned after 30 years, then we don't contribute to climate mitigation. Carbon is again going to be released in the atmosphere. So we need to check that those projects are permanent, like the carbon removals are permanent. Then safeguards to ensure that the project is not harmful to biodiversity, ecosystems, or local communities, and the benefits are distributed equitably and transparently. The governance of the project, like the existence of processes and policies to ensure efficient management, transparency, and accountability. And then, of course, the performance, the extent to which the project has achieved its promises in terms of CO2 reduction. That the project is not overestimating its impact, like the baselines that have been estimated before the project versus the impact that the project has after its planting are accurate and not overestimated. And the ownership, who owns the project, who has a say in the design and the implementation of the benefits of this project. So all these are very important safety nets that we have, that this project actually makes a contribution and it's not to climate mitigation and it's not a greenwashing, basically. So, but all these have a price. So there is no single price to say that a project in India costs this amount of dollars, a credit costs the X amount of dollars in India and Y amount of dollars in Germany. There are different factors that are shaping the price of carbon credits, and I will explain them. But before I get into that, we have our third poll question, and we would like to know from you, how much would you be willing to pay to offset your carbon emissions? And this is a price per ton, per credit. So you see the different options there. Do we have enough answers, Lisa?
Yes. Almost everybody.
Mm-hmm.
These are the results.
All right. Okay. Yeah, it makes sense because this kind of follows the preference of the carbon credit types of carbon credit projects from the previous question. Thank you very much. Really, really valuable information, although it is not us who make the prices. So let's move on, Lisa, and I will explain to you what drives the price of a carbon project. Obviously, the land, the cost of land, and the level of wage of labor costs is a big factor. Different countries have different costs of land, different labor costs, and of course, the economies of scale. I mean, if you have to restore a big land, a large piece of land, you get better prices in equipment and planting material if you purchase a lot. So economies of scale do apply there. But the major costs have to do, of course, with project implementation, but there are other ones. For example, setting up the carbon project, to design the project development documents, to go through the validation and verification, because we are standing in front of our computers here and the project takes place in the other side of the world. There has to be some sort of safety nets in between and independent bodies validating and verifying the carbon performance of that project and these costs, as well as monitoring. So setting up the carbon project is a significant cost. The second key driver is the actual project implementation itself, the investment needed for buying the land, planting the trees, buying the equipment, and of course to have people to maintain the new forest day to day. And you need to have these people, because if you don't have the human presence there, there are different risks of fire. If, for example, weeds are overgrown in the first years, the plants don't grow as efficiently, and this is itself a fire risk. So all these have a cost. And of course, there are price drivers that are dictated by the market. For example, volume. The more carbon credits you purchase, the better price usually we are able to get. And there are costs related to the verification standard. The vintage, is it a project that has already planted the trees or receiving money to plant the trees in the immediate future? And of course, the co-benefits that I have discussed before. And there are, of course, business margins. This is a market. This is a voluntary carbon market, and there are business margins to the project owner, marketing fees like intermediaries, resellers, marketplaces. All those shape up the price of a carbon credit. That's why it is difficult to say that carbon credits cost $5 or $20 or $50. It all depends. So here I have a breakdown of those costs for your information. So just to design a project, like to put in paper, like the feasibility study, the risk analysis, the business case, the business model, costs about $50,000 to $200,000, because it requires a lot of measurements, a lot of research. Then there are registration fees with the verification standard body, which is $1,000 to $2,000. Then is the validation that goes to the validation and verification body, $15,000 to $20,000. The verification, that's the next step, another so many. And then for every credit you buy, there is about between like 5 cents and $4 per carbon credit that is taken by the standard body. And of course, the monitoring costs are variable. So the overall cost of setting up a project for usually 20 to 30 years is something between $80,000 to $250,000. And once this life cycle of carbon project development, convincing gaming CEOs to offsetting, purchasing carbon credits results in a nicely illustrated document, a certificate like the one on your right side panel. This is how a carbon certificate looks like. This is one of our recent purchases from the agroforestry project in Indonesia. And now we have paid a certain amount of money to remove 480 carbon credits, 400 tons of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere for a year. And the long number PVC ID 1040000, all these are the serial numbers of the carbon credits that have been removed now from the market. And now they are owned by the beneficiary. Here is the GamesForest.Club, and the GamesForest.Club is not allowed to sell them again. They are removed from the market. And in this way, this 480 tons of carbon cannot be circulated again and again and again. So it's guaranteed that they are removed. So this is called retirement. The carbon credits are canceled in a registry that is transparently open to everyone. So each ton of carbon dioxide emissions avoided or removed from the atmosphere can only be accounted for once. So just an indication in the whole discussion about pricing, just take a look at this graph, where we are now and where the carbon credit prices are expected to go in the next years, in the next 10 to 40 years. So obviously the more we are delaying climate action, the more severe the problem, the more severe the problem, the more expensive the solution, the more expensive the solution, the more expensive the carbon credits. So maybe this is an indication for people to act now. So I will close my presentation in a minute or two by sharing with you how we monitor those projects. Of course, carbon credit projects have independent validation and verification and controls from independent bodies. And every now and then we receive those reports and we see the impact of investments, how many trees have been planted, what is the impact on biodiversity, how much carbon has been sequestered. There are different field methods that they do it. They measure the diameter of trees, and they have different algorithms and formulas per species of tree that estimates how much carbon is taken from the atmosphere and stored into the tissues of the trees, into the wood and the leaves and the soil, of course. But nowadays, we also have like eyes in space. We can monitor the Earth very, very effectively. And this is a technology that is being revolutionized as we speak. Like next year, it is expected that there will be bespoke satellites that will be monitoring carbon absorption, only that. And this will really make like strides of progress in terms of monitoring. But even now, with the current satellite systems like Sentinel of the European Space Agency, Landsat of NASA, other satellite systems from private companies and so on, we can have estimations and models that are machine learning based that can give us estimations about the changes in vegetation, the primary net productivity in terms of tons of carbon, the annual evapotranspiration rates, species, tree cover, potential tree cover, you name it. So we have like all those type of trends that we can monitor. And here I'm sharing a screenshot of Restore, which is a quite cool platform that we have a partnership with. And by the way, you should take a look at the latest blog post, video blog by Maria, who met the Restore team in Zurich a few days ago as part of your campaign trip. It's really insightful. And then the other monitoring system that we combine, you see here, it's like a plot of land in Portugal. It has a shape, and then it's the same plot of land that visualizes different types of metrics like loss of tree cover over the past years, the different percentage of removals, emissions, net removals, and so on. And the Global Forest Watch is also providing alerts through a notification, through an email, every time a fire is detected and validated into the system. So we now have the ability to know when a fire is putting at risk the forest land in a matter of minutes. And we are also developing our own monitoring in certain plots. Obviously, if we have like a large investment in carbon credits, then we have the ability to create our own monitoring system by sourcing satellite images ourselves. That can give us more frequent imaging. Nowadays, we can have like an image of the plot every couple of days. So this is really fine grained, and we can have that. So in closing, the take-home message is really that carbon credits is like, this is a nice analog, it's like ice cream. You only get it if you only get ice cream if you eat your vegetables. So you can use carbon offsets only if you take climate action to reduce your emissions, as said before. And just as there are many flavors of ice cream, there are also different types of credits out there. Sorbet is not an ice cream, and minimum offset standards are also necessary. There is a standard that says that sorbet is an ice cream. So standards are important. And just like choosing a generic versus artisanal brands, there is quality aspects that need to be distinguished in offsets in order to make a right choice. And you can pay extra for nuts, fruits, candy, or specific SDGs that you want to target to enhance quality and appeal of offsets, depending on your company's needs. It's all there. Then quality, good ingredients and processes make quality ice cream. And offsets need integrity in their entire value chain, from the design all the way to communicating carbon offsets of a company. And in both ice cream and carbon offsets, buyers make choices based on attributes and outcomes they want, and they are willing to pay. You pay for good ice cream, you get good ice cream, simple. And responsibility for a contaminated batch of ice cream lies with the producer. So the buyers of offsets must not be responsible for the process. And this is something that you can tell your clients, your gamers, right? And it is our job to ensure that the producer is producing a high quality product to you. And just as overconsumption can lead to obesity, reduced emissions that are not yet reduced must carry more stringent requirements for use. So having the GamesForest.Club doing an amazing work to find the best projects for you to offset your carbon emissions doesn't mean that you can pollute a little bit more just because you have a way to reduce the amount of carbon you emit. People need to start reducing their carbon footprint. Companies need to do that. Sectors need to do this. The whole world needs to do that. And to make offsets as widely available as ice cream, we need a liquid market with a variety, different actors, industry standards, choices in the market, but also a system that makes bad actors pay and take the reputational damage they deserve for their bad actors, the bad actions. So I really like this analog from the Climate Policy Initiative, and I'm going to stop here by sharing our next webinar, which will be on the 13th of April in a month, where I will be joined by Gareth Kratz from WWF Germany, and there we will talk about the old growth forest of the future, which is a particular land use type and restoration process. Lisa, please share the registration link in the chat for our participants to register on that webinar as well. And this will share insights from the ground from restoration projects in Germany, where the WWF is restoring monocultures of spruce with broadleaf forests, like the ancient indigenous forests of Europe, and is creating the old growth forests of the future, more resilient to pest attacks like insects and droughts and so on. So I'm really looking forward myself for this discussion, and I hope we will see many of you as well. I'm going to stop here and stop sharing my screen, and I'm happy to answer questions and share reflections with all of you.
So we have two questions in the chat. Thank you, Pavlos. Monica is asking, what developing countries are you working with? I am in Kenya. Is the cooking stove available there?
Well, to start with, we don't work with cooking stoves. The reason is that we truly believe that right now, we really need to be looking at really radical solutions that provide as many co-benefits as possible. And it's not only about reducing the amount of smoke that comes out of a cooking stove. It is about really making like a huge effort to remove the excess carbon from the atmosphere. And it's also the aesthetics of our digital twin, which, as you see behind me, is full of digital trees, not of digital cooking stoves. So these are preferred solutions. So my question is, would you consider supporting a forest project in Kenya? And I'm sure we'll be able to find one for you.
And Christine is asking a question about your future plans. Do you think that most of your offered projects will be usable for offsetting?
I already answered this one in the chat. I thought I sent it to all, but like we always will like keep the balance between like carbon offset, but also just like forest protection projects and reforestation, because like we also personally believe that especially biodiversity is very important, and like just focusing on reducing carbon or only on carbon is not the way to go. It's always like a combination. So that's why we want to keep like a combination of projects. So yeah. And I also put a link into the chat where you can see all of our projects which we offer. But maybe Pavlos, please, if you also have something to say on that. Sorry.
No, I think you cover. If I get the question right, if the carbon credits will be, our offering of carbon projects will continue, I think it should be expanded. And we are right now in a time where, although ecosystem restoration has been around for a few years, and there are indeed a lot of useful lessons learned about what works and what doesn't, unfortunately, there are still a lot of projects that are not made correctly, and a lot of money are put in, and these fail, or at least they do not meet their expectations and promises in terms of carbon capture. But there are also indeed a lot of really cool projects out there. And for one thing, I'm personally very excited to spend my days like looking what the best goodies out there are. And of course, like one thing is, right now we are working with the market as it is now. But like in the very few next years, there will be also a revolution there, because there is more public pressure, there is more scrutiny, there will be need for not stricter standards, but for more transparency and for more trust and for more accountability. And there we will have like other layers of innovation coming up in the market, like blockchains, carbon neutral blockchains that are offering really cool ways to ensure immutability and transparency. And when talking about the gaming industry, because I see here working exclusively with the gaming industry, we are coming from there. So as an organization, but like we want to see this type of action taking place across the creative industries and the cultural and creative sector. But I was saying that gaming is a very, very interesting case study on itself in the voluntary carbon market, because games can potentially go into the devices of over 3.2 billion people. And as said, like one of the big challenges and opportunities for carbon credits is really to open up this opportunity to every single citizen that lives and uses energy and transport and so on. They should have a way of mitigating their carbon footprints as well. And games offer that, because you can integrate like this type of carbon assets into games. And as a matter of fact, we have already experimented with a few of our gaming partners integrating data coming from those projects in order to support those projects. So I think it's only the beginning, but also ourselves as a young organization are facing our challenges. Our strongest card is to maintain integrity on what we are doing, transparency, sound communication and coordination with our club members, and of course expand this community. And one way or another, I think that the gaming industry will also need to start very seriously thinking about reducing, but also offsetting its carbon emission, which are massive, because especially now in the era of cloud, this is only expected to increase. So for one thing, if we are able to innovate, to build nice and exciting games, we should be able to innovate in order to turn this problem and this crisis into a playful and fun challenge. And again, I'm very optimistic about this, because if there are a group of people that can design really nice challenges, is gaming company, game designers. So yeah, let's put our efforts behind that.
I just wanted to quickly say, because we are 7 minutes over time, or 8, like, thank you very much for everyone who has to leave. Like, of course, we will continue with the questions, but yeah, just for everyone who has to go, thank you so much for participating, and hope to see you soon.